We're in this cycle. And the first sign that complexity is outpacing our cognitive capabilities as a human being is that we become gridlocked. We know what the problems are, we can't get on top of them. We can't get consensus, we can't get agreement, we can't get that word movement. The second is that there's a massive confusion in the society and amongst leaders between beliefs and actual knowledge, empirical knowledge. And the third is that public policy begins to be based on beliefs. And then collapse ensues. The conditions for collapse begin to appear in every society. We can go back to the Romans, we can go back to the Khmer Empire. In my book, I cover many, many civilizations because that's what took the 6 years of writing it, was to go back and see, is there a pattern? Because the collapse isn't interesting. It's not. When you're already at the fiscal cliff, it's too late. It's the road signs as you're traveling toward that cliff that are fundamentally much more interesting because they allow us the opportunity to turn away. And that is who you are. That's what you're responsible for. You are at the vanguard of change. Your hands are on that steering wheel. You can turn society away from that cliff, but only if we understand what the dynamics are and what the solutions are. One of the things that we have to remember is that we are not born blank slates. We were told many, many years ago that you were a blank slate, and your teacher wrote on your slate, and your friends wrote on your slate, and then eventually that's who you became. But we forgot our inheritance, our genetic inheritance. Now, not too long ago, I used myself as a guinea pig, by the way, for all the things I'm talking to you about. Not too long ago, I was wondering why I do the things I do that are completely irrational. I have struggled with a weight problem all my life. If you've got a buffet out and you've got some healthy choices, carrot sticks, celery, and you got some glazed donuts over there, get out of my way. My hand's going for the glazed donut. And I know I should never eat another donut the rest of my life. There's no reason to eat a donut, but I want them. I want them. Oh, do I want them. And I realized that I am the descendant of tribes that were very, very good at identifying high calories. And in earlier times, that was a massive advantage, by the way, because in times of food shortage, those organisms of my tribe that ate those healthy carrots and celery, their DNA is not in the room. I made it. They didn't. So what's happened is that the environment has changed. I've also made another discovery about my ancestors. My ancestors were really good at staying still and not moving around unless they needed to find more donuts, right? Or fight off a predator. And it turns out I'm not the only one, right? We all have kind of crazy behaviors that we can't explain, but we never make any accommodation for how that plays out in the workplace. I had a CEO of a major Fortune 500 company come up to me after one of my presentations, and he said, Rebecca, you're very fun, you're very smart, but I don't have any of those situations. I'm a very rational guy. I make my decisions based on data. And I thought about it. I thought, what could I say to him? And I came up with something that was pretty cool. I said to him, do you ever go grocery shopping? And he said, yes, I do. And I said, well, let me ask you to can you do a little experiment for me, just for fun? And he said, sure. Well, what is it? And I said, I want to save you a lot of time and trouble. I don't want you going up and down the aisle having to look for everything that you want, bread, milk, cereal. I said, what I want you to do is get your cart. I want you to go straight to the checkout line, and all those people that are lined up to pay for their stuff, just take the stuff out of their baskets. They got everything you need. He said, what? I said, shop out of their baskets. He looked at me and says, I'm not going to do that. And I said, why? They haven't paid for it. It's not theirs. They're in line to go pay for it. It belongs to the store. And I said, what do you suppose would happen? He said, well, there'd be a fist fight. They'd call the manager. I said, what's the manager going to do? You're not stealing. They haven't paid for it. And I said, why do you suppose a fist fight would erupt? Why do you suppose chaos would ensue? And he said, I don't know why, but I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to shop out of other people's carts. I said, people are funny about their grocery carts. If you even go over to someone's and accidentally push it, they go, hey, 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 that's my cart. No, it's not. It's the store's cart, and the stuff in it doesn't belong to you. Now, you try that out. But get your boxing gloves ready, okay? But in earlier times, a territory marked had the things that we needed to survive. And today, sometimes that territory is my job. Sometimes it's my state. It has the things I feel are vital to my survival, my family's survival, my troop. And when you're in a grocery store, the cart is your territory. And you better not come in it, because even the most peaceful bonobo monkeys will attack if you intrude on their territories. What other genetic predispositions get in our way of progress, of movement? Well, one of them is a real problem for us as human beings. We're struggling with this right now. And that is that you are wired today, at this point in time, only to respond to short-term danger. If I go in here and I take a snake out and I throw it out into the middle of the room, you'll be tripping all over yourselves to get out of the way. That's because your body will fill with chemicals and you go into fight and flight. But when we put a cuff on people and we stick them in a lab and we show them global burning, not global warming, global burning, or we show them what's going to happen to the federal deficit, their heartbeat does not go up 1 beat per hour. So you have no physiological response to long-term danger. So when people come to me and they say, how do we get our organizations to take action? How do we get them to move on these initiatives? How do we move faster? I say to them, if you don't make it a snake, you don't have any physiological response. Now, I'm not a fear monger. Don't make everything a snake, or after a while we become desensitized to snakes. That's not the direction you want to go in. But planning suffers because there is human biology, there is no human reaction to long-term threat. So how do we break the cycle? Can we really innovate our way out of a repetitive pattern of collapse? This was the question I posed to myself before I wrote my book. Because otherwise, I was writing a book on gloom and doom, and you could tell I'm kind of a sunny personality. I'm an optimist, and I'm a happy person. So I didn't really want to write that book, so I had to go looking. And what I discovered was the age-old principles of adaptation. Megginson says that it's not the strongest of us that'll survive. It's not even the smartest of us. But it's the organizations and the individuals that adapt quickly. Fast adaptation is all we have. No other living organism understands tomorrow. Have you ever thought about that? They don't understand the concept of tomorrow, let alone a week, let alone a month, a year, 5 years down the road. And so the highest instrument that we in this room have inherited over millions of years of ancestors is our ability to preview what is coming and then take an action in the present to circumvent or minimize an event that hasn't occurred. If that isn't the greatest survival advantage that's ever been invented, I don't know what is. You can get rid of a danger before it happened. No creature, no living creature has ever had that. So the question is whether we call upon the higher instruments of our genetic inheritance, or we fall to the lowest, those we share in common with the lower animals. This is the choice we must make. This is why it's messy. We are choosing between higher genetic instruments and lower genetic instruments. So now let's talk about fast adaptation. How do we do it? Well, we have strategic and technology. We have strategy and technology. They got to go hand in hand. And we also have physical adaptation. But when we're looking at overwhelming complex situations that are time sensitive and mission critical, we can't really solve those in a linear fashion. We need a different model, and thankfully, we have models that are very successful in high failure rate environments. We just don't apply them to solutions. We apply them to investments. So the model that I like to use is venture capital. For every 100 companies that venture capitalists do spectacular due diligence on, they're only expecting maybe 10 or 15 to do well. Recently, I interviewed AJ Kubani, who's the founder of the As Seen on TV brands, and it's much worse for him. He looks at 10,000 prospective products, 1,000 he does due diligence on, 100 he tests markets, and 10 qualified for As Seen on TV. But he's a billionaire. He just bought a $34 million condo in Miami, I think it is. So talk about a high failure rate, 10 out of 10,000. But he understands what a high failure rate environment is. The rescue of the Chilean miners, you might remember that. At the time, it was no different than the Gulf oil spill. Time-sensitive, mission-critical problem. Disastrous consequences if they didn't get those miners out. What did they do? They knew due diligence would not allow them to narrow down the one plan that would work. It was impossible. So they launched 16 plans in tandem. Anybody who had a plan that even remotely looked like it would work. And they marched down, and then 16 turned into 15. 15 turned into 14, because as empirical data was coming in, they were realizing that plan won't work, that plan won't work. And when they rescued every single Chilean miner, they were still evoking 2 or 3 plans. Because of budget restraints, there is tremendous pressure, right, to consolidate and get down to single systems. But in nature, any drive toward singularity is a drive toward extinction. You find a species that will only eat one animal or one plant, they're on their way out. So here's where technology comes to the rescue. We have 5 categories of technology, and I'm going to roll through these pretty fast. Analysis, big data analytics, but we got to combine that with data visualization that makes the data consumable to us. Mobility and access, mobile apps, cloud computing, and social media. Content, bigger data is on the way. Facial recognition software, nanobots, 3D printing, surveillance, drones, holograms. These are not on your radar, and you are not moving toward deploying those new technologies. You're already late to the table. Cybersecurity, you're going to hear more about that later, and neuroscience. Neuroscience ought to be part of everybody's agenda in every state. So let's start with analysis. Big data analytics, what is it? Well, big data can go and search the entire universe of structured and unstructured data and bring back to us just the information that we need. Remember, we were saying we're looking for a needle in a stack of needles? That's what big data analytics does. It's only going to bring back the data that we need across that huge universe of information. The big data application I will tell you about that I had a chance to witness is in the ER of a hospital. A patient rolls in. All the information that is known about that stranger, that patient, is put into a Watson type of system, and Watson comes back and says, it is 64% that the patient has this, 29% they have this, 26% that they have this. However, and this is where I think big data really pays off, analytics pays off. It goes to the person who has checked you in and says, but if you got me this data next, my diagnosis would improve 73%. So instead of when you arrive at the ER, you're taking a bet as to the smartest, most capable person in the hospital is going to take you in and make a diagnosis, or the least capable person, and that's going to determine whether you live or die. Instead of that happening, now the playing field is level. It's not based on my experience or my education, because I can put in the symptoms that are known, and Watson will search the universe of medical data, come back, give me the probabilities, and more importantly, give me a pointer as to where I want to go. This will help in the skilled labor shortage. Big data analytics has payoffs beyond being able to get to a solution that's empirically based quick enough that you can take an action. It's also going to change the labor market very dramatically. Data visualization. You can give me all the data in the world, but if it's 18 pages of spreadsheets, no, that's not happening anymore. I need data I can react to. And that means looking at people like Tableau software as an example, where they will take massively complex data and reduce it down to a chart, a graph, a bunch of bars, something that I can take action on. In terms of mobility and access, you know that if you don't tie a big data system into a mobile app, you really don't have anything. Because everybody can't be at their desk and everybody can't have access within the company. You need it outside the company. To give you an example of big data and how it tied to a mobile app, it completely revolutionizes agriculture. When I was hired to work with Dole Fresh Foods as a consultant, I spent 3 months listening. They're the largest food producer in the world. I spent 3 months going around the world, looking at all their agricultural production areas, listening to what kinds of issues they had. And when I came back, I said, I need to change the vocabulary inside of Dole. And they said, okay, what do you have in mind? And I said, you're actually running an emergency room. When you cut a head of lettuce, it is a patient that is dying. Now we need to get that dying patient to the grocery store before they're brown and dead. You have the same problem as an ER. And they said, what are you talking about? And I said, it's the same model. And data analytics used in an ER. And I said, so I want all the executives to go and meet your friends in hospital administration right now. Go down and find out what procedures and what they're using in an ER. And then we have to go around and educate everyone. And they said, okay, how are we going to do that? So within Dole, they began to adopt emergency room procedures to get produce, which is dying, to the store. It's the same problem. You might not look at it that way, but it is. But more importantly, as they began to do these big data analytics, more importantly, what was fascinating is that they were able to give an app to a farmer who was growing produce on a hillside in Venezuela, right? And he can now plug in and say, I had a 2% humidity change at the top of my hill. What should I do? And Dole can come back and say, start a 1% calcium drip, and your fruit won't be too soft, and you'll still get a high yield. That information is available on a mobile phone to anybody that's a Dole grower around the world. Let's talk about content creation. I just came back from a conference where they had facial recognition software on every single attendee, and they were giving, and it was very annoying, they were giving feedback to the speakers. People are tuning out. They're excited, they're not excited, because we express pain and pleasure through our faces. So this was being used in a hospital. They had a camera on a patient who had just come out of surgery, and it was wired to a nurse's station. And as the patient was waking up, remember, pain and pleasure through your face, as the patient was waking up and they started to exhibit slight amounts of discomfort, the nurse's station was rung and the nurse appeared with pain medication before the patient started madly ringing the buzzer. So facial recognition software is going to play a big role in education. It will give automatic feedback to teachers that their students either learned the content or didn't. They're falling asleep on you, whatever. Very, very important. Nanobots. If nanobots are not on your radar now, they should be. They're going to completely revolutionize healthcare. The first nanobot that is the size of a human cell is now in trials. It was injected into a Norwegian rat. It was programmed to eliminate the cancer cells within the Norwegian rat, and it eliminated them. And then it was expunged. Smaller than the size of a human cell. Medicine as we know it, we're not going to be taking pharmaceuticals. Radiation treatment, no. Nanobots will be injected into your body and they'll be programmed to eliminate the plaque for Alzheimer's. Nanobots currently are getting ready to replace pesticides in agricultural growth. They'll be injected into a plant. They'll be sprayed. They'll crawl into a plant, and they will report how much water that individual plant in the field needs and what vitamin deficiencies it needs. And the nanobot will administer those so that you'll get the maximum productivity from every single plant in the field. But we've recently discovered there's a third form of problem solving that is emerging in the human brain, and we call it insight. Sometimes we call it an aha moment. And up to this point, we've kind of made those folklore. Newton's sitting under a tree and an apple falls on his head and he discovers gravity, and Archimedes sits in a tub and the water falls over the sides and he discovers displacement theory. But it turns out it's actually a process, a neurological process in the head. And it seems to be the spontaneous connection of two pieces of data that you have never connected, never even thought of connecting before, and bam, you have a solution to a problem. Some people report this when they wake up in the morning. Some people when they're washing dishes, some people when they're jogging. There's a lot of reports that come in. Here's the interesting thing though. We can put, if you think about it, it's the first time we can put a skull cap on your head and watch what's going on under your skull. We've never been able to do that before. We didn't know how the brain actually worked, but we do now. And if you know anything about science, when you get to a point where you can predict that an event's going to occur, you're really onto something. And about 300 milliseconds before you're going to have a breakthrough and take two pieces of content that you've never married before and connect them as a solution to a very complex problem that's way above the pay grade of left and right brain thinking, a small part of your brain called the ASTG lights up like a Christmas tree. And bam, we run in there and we know that you're going to solve the problem. There are top attributes of high-performing states, companies, and organizations. They are fast adapters in terms of strategy, tactics, and technology. They strive for empirically based policy, not politically based policy. They all accommodate diversification and redundancy so as not to set themselves up for cataclysmic failure. And lastly, they have people in leadership that are preemptive and predictive and empowered to take action. And lastly, I want to leave you with this. My favorite, as an evolutionary biologist and a sociobiologist, my favorite movie in the entire world is Moneyball. Anybody see Moneyball? It's the best movie about the difference between empirically based decisions and emotionally based decisions.